Hi, Achim here from InnerSpace Explorers. So today we want to talk about double rebreather. And if you follow my actual project, the Deepwater Treasure, if you haven't seen it, check out the links in the description. I briefly talk about this, but I thought it's worth doing an extra video about this and not going too much into detail on the video on the description of the project, because that's a very different concept regarding bailout and safety. So on that particular dive, and let me just take that as an example, this is a 160-meter dive, but it could also be an extremely long cave dive or something else. If you do a rebreather dive like that, you always need, and again, sorry for interrupting the flow again, but if you're an avid rebreather diver, you obviously know what I'm talking about. So this is more for those of you who are in the beginning of their technical diving, who may think about a rebreather, so that are not as deep in the topic as possible. So it's not for the hardcore technical diver that's like, yeah, I know about this. So if you do a dive like this, you obviously want to be prepared for a rebreather failure. So you need bailout. And other than in open circuit diving, where you consider the worst case scenario, one of the divers being out of gas, so the other person has to carry enough gas for itself and the person out of gas to make it back to the surface or to the next breathable gas. So if we talk about various gases, so decompression gases, etc., for example, you have 50% gas with you, so everybody has his own stage. So you obviously calculate 221 meters where that person that is out of gas on the bottom can switch to his or her own decompression gas. Or if it's just one gas, like nitrox, air, whatever, you would calculate up to the surface. So if you're diving a rebreather, you carry bailout for yourself in case the rebreather has an issue, but not for your partner, because that doesn't make sense, because you're like redundant anyway, because everybody has open circuit bailout. So if you're running, you basically can't run out of gas. So you're on the rebreather. So what can happen is you're out of rebreather. So your rebreather has some sort of issue. So you have a CO2 breakthrough, you have water in the loop, you have an issue with the cells, so you can't read it anymore, whatever. So you bail out from the rebreather, you go back to open circuit, but there's no need to go to a partner because you have your open circuit bailout gas with you, and the partner has the same. So you're both divers are independent, or you're diving solo anyway. So at a certain point, the open circuit bailout that you would have to carry to make it back to the surface is getting really, really big, a lot. So I recently made a video, Rebreather Bailout, and I'll put it right here, where I explained that a little bit in detail on an example, because somebody made a video and talked about it in shared bailout. So like two divers, but each of them just carrying part of the bailout. And I talked a little bit about that and explained how I would plan that. And in this particular dive, it would have been 5 stages. So now talking about the new project, this 160-meter dive, if I do the math, I would come up with a minimum of 8 stages. So doing a dive with 8 stages, theoretically possible, but nothing you want to do because you can't move anymore. It's way too much equipment. And so you need to find a reasonable alternative. So obviously you could say, I'll stage all stages. Even if I'm in the ocean, I have a downline, so I put gas on the downline, I hang it underneath the boat, whatever. The problem is, if you go down that line or a slope or whatever, and then you start your dive, and you have an issue, now you have to go back that path to find this gas. So if you make an open like an ascent in open water because you immediately want to bail out, you don't have that gas. So in my opinion, that's not a clever solution, and nothing I would, especially for this dive that I'm planning, that I would consider a reasonable option. So of course you could scale down the dive and say, okay, I mean, I have to bring it back to a point where I could do it with 5 stages. Or you could hope for the best, like, I will be fine somehow. And there is people out there that plan like that. Or you have to find a complete different strategy. And in this particular case, the strategy clearly is a second rebreather, because now I do not have to carry all this open circuit bailout in case the rebreather fails, because if the rebreather fails, I just switch to another rebreather. So what does that mean regarding gas? So the rebreather has always oxygen and diluent. So let's say, just for the sake of it, the oxygen is with the particular rebreather. So I have two rebreathers, each of them has its own oxygen source. So the diluent, and that really depends on what rebreather it is and how you drive it. So let's talk about the classic KISS, for example. And most rebreathers are the same. So you have your oxygen on one side and the diluent on the other side in a 2 or 3 liter tank. And that's what drives the rebreather. And then you would add stages open circuit for bailout gas. So when I did the channel dive, I had 2 KISS Classic on the back. So like a set of doubles, I had these 2 canister tubes from the KISS. And then I actually had twice the oxygen. So I had left and right on the back. I had my oxygen, and I had a drive bottle with diluent as a stage, bigger one. So that was basically connected to both of these rebreathers. So it was a little bit of a special setup, but I also had this very special scooter, this shuttle thing. So everything was arranged a little bit on this special dive, and it worked perfectly. So the other option obviously would be to use a back-mounted rebreather and a chest-mounted rebreather, for example, the Go. So that would have the benefit of not having 2 loops around your neck, because that was something that I found pretty annoying during the channel dive, that I had these 2 big things here that I had to handle, and I personally found this pretty uncomfortable, but I mean, of course it works. And there's more divers doing stuff like that. I can remember back in the day, the WKPP and the EKPP, they did a lot of double PCR dives with the 2 loops. And you can also take 1 loop and like clip it off. So there's a variety of methods to handle equipment like that. But now, if you use a chest-mounted rebreather, and it doesn't have to be the Go before somebody complains about that as well. It can be also a Choptima or a Triton or whatever chest-mounted rebreather you want to use. Suddenly you have the rebreather here, and you have this loop that goes like this. So I have 1 loop coming around my neck with the BOV or the DSV right here, and then I have the second one here. And now I can basically do this, and I just have to figure out which unit is the primary and which one is the backup. And then obviously, when I talk about that later on, you have to maintain both rebreathers, because you don't want to run into an issue with the rebreather and then figure out the other one's flooded because you never touched it. So that's the option number 2. And now, saying that each of the rebreathers has its own oxygen source, we only need to talk about the diluent. And if you now take 2 additional diluent sources, and let's say we take 2 80 cubic feet stages with the gas that we need as diluent, and both of these stages have a connector for each rebreather, then you are basically fully redundant, because if the stage creates, and let's say, just for an example, let's say we take the Go in the front and the KISS Classic on the back. So my KISS Classic has a switch lock connector for drive gas, which looks a little bit like an inflator for those of you who haven't seen one. Same principle, but it is not an inflator, it's something special. And the Go for the diluent has actually an inflator connector. So the drive stage would have a switch lock hose and an inflator hose. So I could use that stage on both rebreathers, and then I would have a second one with the same setup, because now I could actually attach each of these stages to one of the rebreathers, so they're both working, and I can actually maintain pressure in them, which is important. And on the other hand, if I have a rebreather issue, I just switch the rebreathers. If one of the stages creates an issue, like blown O-ring, blown hose, whatever, I could also switch stages, because each stage has both connectors. So I'm breathing on the go, for example, and that stage creates an issue. The other is connected to the classic KISS on the back. I could still use this one, disconnect the broken stage and connect the other one, and so both stages can drive both rebreathers, which would almost be like double redundancy. And therefore I could do the same dive with these two stages, because yeah, if one of the rebreathers creates an issue, I just switch rebreathers and I can finish my dive, and that way the dive would be way more doable than with 8 stages and 1 rebreather, if that makes sense to you. Regarding the maintenance of the rebreather during the dive, so if you take a rebreather underwater and you're not breathing it, there's always the risk of flooding it. And I've actually seen that. It was for a while people were experimenting a lot, and I think there's still people doing that, like putting oxygen rebreathers in caves for their oxygen decompression. And I've seen all kinds of solutions like vacuumized in a plastic bag and whatever, but I've seen quite a few of these being flooded while they were sitting there, because they start sucking in water, because you basically have to maintain the same pressure inside than outside. And if you do a deep dive, especially, and you're going down and you have a second rebreather and you're not putting the same amount of gas in it that you have outside, like it's not in a working position, so you basically switch off the gas and you just take it down, you will flood the rebreather, more or less. I mean, not necessarily, so people will now argue like, yeah, why would it flood? But if the pressure difference increases, normally you will flood it. That's at least my experience. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that rebreather is working all the time. So what would be recommended is to switch these rebreathers from time to time to make sure it's working and I have a working backup. Because if you figure out like, oh, my backup rebreather is not working, you should call the dive, because your bailout option is basically gone. And so both rebreathers should be connected and should be maintained in regular intervals, every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes. Well, I mean, you need to come up with this. That way you prevent these rebreathers from flooding and make sure that they are ready to be used when it's time. And if they have like an automatic ADV, if they get compressed, then the ADV normally is firing and maintains the internal pressure of the rebreather. So is that somebody you should do? Not really. I'm just thinking, I think there's probably more people teaching it. I only know that Ed Sorensen in the US is teaching a double rebreather class. So also a lot of people are doing this. I know quite a few cave divers who do this. It's something that you should really approach very slowly, and probably with somebody that is experienced in it as your mentor. So it's not like, oh, great idea, forget about the open circuit bailout, let's just put on another rebreather. That is a lot of equipment loading, a lot of task loading, and there's a good, I mean, as you have to switch rebreathers frequently, there's a good chance, if you're not rock solid with it, that you flood the rebreather, and if you flood the other one, you're dead, because there is no open circuit bailout. So if you mess up the first rebreather, you should bail out, and if you mess up the second one, there is nothing to bail out. So be super careful with this. It's just a concept that I talked about in another video, and I wanted to discuss a little bit because people will ask. And so I hope that gave you a general idea of it. But don't want this video to be mistaken as a guideline of how to do this. It's not. So really be careful with this. Don't try this at home. And if you have questions, comments, put them in the comment section. For a while, this will be members and patrons only anyway. And yeah, stay safe. See you in the next video. And don't forget to check out my new project. Bye-bye.